Welcome, all my fellow Washington fans. Let's try that again. Welcome, all my fellow Washington brethren and sistren. I am your man and resident Washington football fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Washington Football Report. So, 53-man rosters are set. And some surprises, some not so surprising. All right, so of the 53, I got 46 of them right. Sounds about where I usually am. Some years I'm a little bit closer to 53. Some years I'm a little bit further away from 53. But not too many surprises here. We talked about some guys that could potentially push for the roster, and a lot of those guys ultimately did make the football team. There were a few that I did not anticipate getting cut, like a Cam Sims, who I thought was going to make this football team. JP Finley was right. I was wrong. Finley said that Isaiah Wright was essentially a lock to make the football team. I disagreed. I thought that they would go with Cam Sims and Trey Quinn would ultimately make the football team. Both of those guys were cut. The question was, would they go with 5 receivers or 6? I told you for much of the process, it was going to be 5. And then I changed my mind at the end and went with 6. They ultimately went with 6. We talked about whether they would go with 4 or 5 running backs. Well, we talked about that yesterday when Adrian Peterson was cut, and that was a surprise move. A big-time curveball thrown everyone's direction. So that let us know they were going to go with 4 versus 5 backs. And so when you look at the way they decided to go, they went a little heavier on the defensive side of the football, and they decided to spend their extra capital roster-wise on the offensive line, on the offensive side. So when you talk about the defensive line, we had 8 defensive linemen that we thought were going to make the team, or I had 8 defensive linemen that we thought were going to make the team. They ultimately kept 9. I said they were going to keep 9. Remember, I threw you the curveball of James Smith-Williams, who ultimately made the football team. So that was one of my curveballs that actually did come through. And so they kept 9 defensive linemen, which I thought they would. They kept 6 defensive backs. I initially had 6, and then I crossed out Greg Stroman, and they kept him. And so I got that one wrong as well. But I thought they were going to keep Aaron Colvin. They decided to go with Danny Johnson. We talked about that on the 53-man roster projection video as well, that he was a name to watch for this football team and that they really liked some of the things that he was doing. And so really, when you look at the grand scheme of things and you look at it from the bigger picture in terms of this roster, Ron Rivera, he tricked me. And I essentially went off of what everyone had been telling me up until the end of this process, which was Rivera sides with the veterans, and Rivera is going to take a look at this roster. He's gonna keep all the young guys he feels that he needs to keep, but a lot of these guys you can stash away on the practice squad, and he's going to do that. I tried to go with the practical approach, which is using all of the things that I've seen transpire over the years with, how you take the roster into consideration with the practice squad and young players, and then using the unique offseason as a way to get young guys onto the practice squad and not have to keep them because of what Rivera's his supposed rationale is usually going with veterans. I was wrong, and Rivera, I think he kind of went away from that. And he talked about it in his presser today, which was interesting. And again, if this information were privy to me earlier, if I were privy to this information earlier, then I might have adjusted my decision making. But Rivera said that in Carolina, what happened to them after the 2015 season when they went to the Super Bowl, he said they got old, like overnight. He looked up and the roster was old. And so I think that scarred him a bit. And they were never really the same team after that 2015 Super Bowl season. And so he said, you know what? I think I'm going to go with the young guys. And this is a different situation. Obviously, he's coming into a rebuilding project here in Washington. But we've talked about letting the young boys play all offseason. And Ron really backed that up here. Like I said yesterday when Adrian Peterson was released, I'm excited about this season because the young boys are really going to get to play. And Ron hammered that home with this 53-man roster. If you take nothing else away from what was done here over the last 48 hours with this roster, then this should be the one takeaway. The young boys are going to get to play. We're going to really find out who can play, who fits, and who doesn't on this roster with this team moving forward this season, because they're going to let the youngins play. I mean, they are going to let the young boys go out there and rumble, young men rumble. And we're going to find out who of this bunch can get it done and should be here long term, and who can't cut it and have to go. And Ron has told the young boys that have made the roster, like the Isaiah Wrights of the world and the Greg Stromans and some of these guys that were on the back end that made it. He said, look, we're going to be rotating a bunch of guys in here, so don't get very comfortable. You've got to prove it still. Even though you made the football team, you've still got to prove it, because we're going to be rotating a lot of guys in to find out what we have. Danny Johnson included. We're going to find out if you really belong here or not. We liked you enough to keep you on the 53, but you could easily be gone if we find someone else is better at your job than you are. So, again, the young boys are going to get to play. That's really exciting. And, you know, the Adrian Peterson cut was a sign of things to come. And that's when I probably should have known. And, you know, what I did was I just cut that one part of the roster out. And I said, wow, this must really mean they love Antonio Gibson. That was a huge part of it, and Rivera has said that already, that they just like what they have at the running back position as a whole with all the young guys. But I could have taken that a step further, and I probably should have taken it a step further in saying that this means that Rivera isn't going to be siding on the erring on the side of caution with veterans and just keeping veterans for the sake of keeping veterans and getting the young guys on the practice squad because you can sneak them onto the practice squad. He's going to throw caution to the wind, and he's going to keep the young boys. And the veterans are going to be in trouble if they don't produce at a high enough clip and haven't shown them enough. If things are equal and they see a young guy and they see a veteran, they're going to take the young guy. And that's what happened to Trey Quinn. That's what happened to Cam Sims. You know, that it became a numbers game at the end of the day. They went heavy on the offensive line. Had they cut ties with one more offensive lineman and only went with 9, as I predicted they would have, then you would have had an extra spot for a sixth receiver. But they decided to go heavy on offensive line because they traded for a tackle in David Sharp. So that pushed them to 10 offensive linemen. They didn't want to cut ties with Cornelius Lucas because they still need depth at tackle. Sadiq Charles isn't a guy that they're not sure about right now. And even if he's healthy, he still hasn't had a lot of work. So they want more depth at tackle. They were afraid to cut Cornelius Lucas loose because, again, this time of the year, there aren't a bunch of able-bodied tackles that you feel comfortable with in this league. And so if you cut a Cornelius Lucas, chances are you're not getting him back. So they didn't want to run the risk. And Ron said that. Look, along the offensive line, we were nervous about cutting ties with guys because we didn't think they were going to pass through waivers, and we just didn't want to take the risk. So instead of exposing those guys to the rest of the league, we just went ahead and kept the offensive line a little bit more robust than maybe we wanted to, but it was out of necessity. And because of that, it becomes a numbers game somewhere else. You decide to keep 4 running backs and only 5 wide receivers. I thought it was going to be a combination of 10 between receiver and running back, whether it's 5 and 5 or 6 and 4. I thought it was going to be 10 total when you looked at the receiver and running back position. It ended up being 9, and that's because they had to keep 10 offensive linemen instead of the 9 that I thought they originally were going to keep. So that was an interesting dynamic there. Let's talk about quickly some of the moves that were made, and then we'll get into the full 53-man roster. We'll break it down. We'll go through each player that made the football team, and then we'll get to your comments. So Cam Sims released. That was one that I didn't see coming. As I told you, I even made a short video that I said that Cam Sims was going to make the football team. I was shocked when I saw his name come across my timeline as a player that was released. Sean Davis was a guy that I told you haven't heard a lot about Sean Davis in camp, but you know who we have heard a lot about? Cameron Curl, the 7th round rookie out of Arkansas. I said, don't be surprised if Curl makes the team and Davis doesn't. I didn't anticipate that happening, however, but it was something that was definitely within the realm of possibility. We talked about that on the 53-man projection show. I told you Cameron Curl was a name to watch. I told you Rivera had good things to say about Cameron Curl and how he didn't repeat mistakes and how he had developed over the life of camp. Well, he impressed them enough to make this football team, and Sean Davis did not. He is gone. They gave him $2 million upon signing as a bonus, and that's the thing you got to love about what this organization is right now, is that it doesn't matter the amount of money a guy has been paid or is supposed to make. If you don't fit in this team's plans or you haven't proven to them over another guy that you belong, it doesn't matter how much money you've accumulated here or how much you're supposed to make. They're going to move on from you. In past years, we were keeping guys just because. That's not the case this year. You got to like that. And so Sean Davis, despite getting a nice, solid piece of change in the offseason, they moved on from him. Trey Quinn was released. Again, a lot of you saw that one coming. Okay, a lot of you saw the writing on the wall. A lot of you weren't Trey Quinn fans to begin with, so you wanted him gone. So any way you could get him out of here, you were looking to get him out of here. That's fine. I thought they were going to keep him. He was a veteran. I thought that he gave them another option in the slot. However, I did tell you this too. Isaiah Wright has been working every single position at wide receiver. He's been working the X. He's been working the Z. He's been working the Y. He's been working the slot as well. He's been working all over the football field. So it wasn't shocking that he himself made this football team and that they like him as a guy inside that can work the slot if need be as well. So Trey Quinn not on the football team. That was a bit of a surprise to me. Not to many of you out there, but it was to me. Reuben Foster to IR. So let me explain to you how IR works this year because it's a little bit different. You know, in the past, when you put a guy on IR, he was done for the year. And then you had the exception that was put out 2 years ago where, okay, you can put a guy on IR, but you get 2 IR exceptions, guys that can come off of the IR list early. And so this year with the COVID situation, the league has expanded that and made it unlimited. You can put as many guys on IR as you like and have them come off of IR after the first 3 weeks of the season whenever you deem them to be ready to go. And so they put Reuben Foster on IR, and he'll be able to come back onto the roster. At that point, though, someone will have to be released to create space for Reuben Foster. So again, this roster, while it is set at 53 now, guys will be cut throughout the course of the season to make room for some of the guys that they've put on IR that could potentially come off of it, like a Reuben Foster. And so Foster is going to play at some point this season when they deem him to be healthy enough and back to the Reuben Foster of old. I don't know when that's going to be. That could be week 4. That could be week 6. That could be week 8. That could be week 12 for all we know. Because remember, this is the last year of Reuben Foster's deal. So they're going to want to see Reuben Foster at some point to make a determination whether they want to re-sign him in the offseason, even if it's a 1-year prove-it deal, or they just want to cut him loose and allow him to sign elsewhere. They need to see him on the field to be able to make that determination whether he's a guy they want back or not. So Reuben Foster, for all intents and purposes, is on the football team. He's just on IR. Just look at it as him. He's in the oven baking right now, and when he's finished baking, they're going to pull him out of the oven, and he's going to be on this roster. Ryan Anderson was reportedly involved in trade talks. Now, we heard that this offseason. Nothing came of it. We talked about that a couple of times during the offseason, and would he be a guy that could be moved potentially? His name floated up again as a name potentially circulating around league circles in potential trade rumors. Nothing came of it again. There was no buzz for him to be traded earlier. I don't know if there was any buzz here. Rivera shot it down and pretty much said, look, there was really nothing out there. And really, we weren't even entertaining offers for Ryan Anderson. That's what you're supposed to say when you don't trade a guy. But I think they were entertaining offers, and I just think they didn't get anything worthy of making a deal. Because look at it this way. I've always used the used car analogy when talking about players that you can either cut or trade, and whether they have more value to you or someone else. And I always look at it with the used car analogy. If you've got a used car, it works perfectly fine, and it's got good mileage on it, and it's always done right by you, and you want $4,000 for the car, and someone wants to pay you $3,000 or $2,500 for the car. And you're like, nope, I want $4,000. If I can't get $4,000 for it, I'm just going to keep it. Why? Because the car has more value to you at $4,000 than it does to just let it go and get the cash value that someone's trying to give you for it. So essentially what I'm saying is, if they said, hey, we want a fourth round pick for Ryan Anderson. We spent a second round pick. We really like Ryan Anderson, and we feel like he can help us this year. If you give us a fourth rounder, he's yours. But if you're trying to lowball us and give us something less than a fourth rounder, we'll just keep him in Washington because we feel like we can get more value out of him than your fifth or your sixth or your seventh round pick. So I think that's kind of the way they went about this situation. Not that he wasn't available. I think he was. This is when there's smoke, there's fire. This isn't the first time we've heard of Ryan Anderson being on the block. I think they were looking to move him, and then they said, if we're not going to get the kind of value we think we can get out of him as a player, we're just going to hold on to him. And I do think they like him, and I do think they love his physicality, and I do think he has a place on this football team. But if they would have gotten some good compensation for him, I think they would have moved him. Similar to the Eagles with Alshon Jeffrey. Never, ever trust a man with two first names. They were looking to move Alshon Jeffrey, and if the right price would have come up, they would have moved on from him. But the right price didn't, and they said, you know what? Alshon Jeffrey is worth more to us than just giving him away for a hot ham and cheese sandwich in a juice box and a half-eaten bag of chips. We'll just hold on to him. Same thing here with Ryan Anderson. Because of Adrian Peterson's release, in lieu of that release, 26 became vacant, and Landon Collins decided he wants to go back to his college number of 26, which then vacated number 20, to which Jimmy Moreland said, I got to get out of the 30s and into the 20s. And so now Jimmy Moreland is number 20 and Landon Collins is 26. And I do want to throw this out here. 27 is still available. And for the life of me, I don't know why no one wants to touch 27. But 27 is available. It's a number in the 20s. Bryce Love, you're on this football team. Could you please get out of 35? 27 is calling your name. Now, there may be some relevance to 35 for Bryce Love. And look, at this point, the numbers are pretty much set. The team has announced the numbers, so I don't think they're going to change. But man, if I'm Bryce Love, and I keep harping on this, and I hate to keep doing this, I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm not sporting 35. That's not a cool number to have at the running back position, but I digress. And finally, Isaiah Wright made the football team, which I didn't see coming necessarily. I didn't count it out, but I didn't think he was going to make the football team. And Rivera threw me a changeup. All right, he told me, Isaiah Wright could have really benefited from more practice time this offseason, and he threw me a changeup. He gave me off speed. I was sitting fastball. He gave me off speed. So kudos to Rivera for switching the game up on me. I thought I knew, and he said, you don't know. Okay, you thought you knew what was coming. You were sitting dead red fastball, and you were looking 97. I gave you 87. You weren't ready. So kudos to him for that as well. With that being said, let's get to the 53-man roster and take a look at what the team decided to do quickly. So as you can see, you're looking at the 53-man roster in front of you. We pretty much were good in terms of the predictions made on the show. I got 4 wrong on this side of the ball. Out of the 7, I got 4 wrong, and I'll explain those to you as we get there. But quarterbacks, there was a lot of talk of Alex Smith, whether he would make the team or not. I never really fed into that discussion. I didn't think there was any way he wasn't making this football team. Maybe IR would have been a possibility for him, but I thought he had done enough to show them that he could be on the roster. And so Alex Smith is on the team. They're carrying 3 quarterbacks. There's really no surprise there. You go to the running backs. We talked about the big surprise there. It was the biggest surprise of all the cuts made this offseason. when trimming the roster down to 53. It was that of Adrian Peterson, the future Hall of Famer. We thought he was going to make this football team. He had taken about 70% of the first team reps in camp. He just started not taking the vast majority of the first team reps last week, and they decided to go with the youngins. And so Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick, Peyton Barber, and Bryce Love are your 4 running backs on this football team. And so, again, no surprise there. After the surprise of Adrian Peterson, we pretty much knew who the 4 running backs were going to be. You go to the wide receivers. There was a discussion on 5 or 6. They went with 5. I thought that was the right decision to make. But I did not think they were going to keep Isaiah Wright at the very end of this roster. But Terry McLaurin, Steven Sims, Antonio Gandy-Golden, and Dontrell Inman were all locks. We all knew that. And so those 4 weren't a surprise. It was what were they going to do, 5 or 6, and who were those guys going to be? If there were 6, and if it was 5, who was that guy going to be? It was one spot for 3 players, and they decided to go with the youth and the upside of Isaiah Wright, the undrafted rookie out of Temple. He can do a lot of things on special teams, and he can play multiple positions. Rivera said it's all about your ability to be flexible. Positional flexibility is something Rivera has harped on a ton. And he talked about why James Smith-Williams made the football team. We'll talk about that here in a second. But he also talked about Isaiah Wright and his positional flexibility. And that's what ultimately won the day for him. His contributions on special teams are also going to be key, but his ability to play every single wide receiver position also helped him make this football team. And then you get to the offensive line. The team was a little bit careful here. They were cautious with the offensive line, maybe a little overly cautious, if you ask me, keeping 10 offensive linemen. But we've seen this team go to hell in a handbasket along the offensive line because of a lack of depth. So you're not going to get me to complain about them keeping 10. I thought they could have gotten away with 9, but they decided to keep 10. They ultimately decided to keep 5 tackles and 5 interior offensive linemen. Jaron Christian, Wes Martin, Chase Roulier, Brandon Sheriff, and Morgan Moses are your 5 starters. And then your guys coming off the bench, Sadiq Charles, Cornelius Lucas, and David Sharp are all of the backup tackles. Remember, they just traded for David Sharp from Las Vegas. And so they decided to go with 5 tackles, and then your 2 backup interior offensive linemen are Wes Schweitzer and Keith Ishmael. I told you Ishmael pretty much made the roster with his versatility and his ability to show that off and showcase it in camp. And then Wes Schweitzer had missed a bulk of camp with an injury, but I told you that Rivera talked about Wes Schweitzer's ability to play multiple positions and that he was a veteran and that they knew what they were getting out of him. And so they were comfortable with him despite him missing some time. So those 10 guys make up the offensive linemen that made the football team. As we move on to the defensive side of the football, 25 on the offensive side, 25 on the defensive side. So perfect symmetry when you look at it from that standpoint. 25, 25, and 3 is your breakdown. But 9 defensive linemen. I got this one right. I told you that James Smith-Williams was a guy that I thought was going to make this football team, and he ultimately did. They love his versatility. I'll tell you what Ron Rivera had to say about him in a second. But Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Tim Settle, Matt Ioannidis, Ryan Anderson, Montez Sweat, Ryan Kerrigan, Chase Young, and James Smith-Williams are your 9 defensive linemen. 5 D ends in Smith-Williams, Young, Anderson, Kerrigan, and Sweat. And 4 interior defensive linemen in Payne, Settle, Ioannidis, and Allen. But the reason James Smith-Williams made this football team is Coach Rivera said the positional flexibility of a James Smith-Williams was just too good to pass up. This is a guy that can play every position along the defensive line. He can play the 1, the 3, the 5, the 6, the 4. Whatever they ask him to do, he can do it. Defensively, they think he can play all of the positions along the defensive line. And so he said, look, this guy can play the 1, the 3, the 5. He can play a 9 if we ask him to go out wide and do that. We can, if he wants, we need him to play inside, he can. If he needs him to play at defensive end, he can. If we have injuries at defensive tackle in a game, James Smith-Williams can kick inside and give us some play inside. And so because of that, we felt good about keeping him on the roster. So that's how James Smith-Williams essentially penetrated the 53-man roster. You get to the linebackers. All of these were correct. We saw this one coming. This was a no-brainer. 6 backers kept on the roster: Khaleke Hudson, Kevin Pierre-Louis, Sean Dion Hamilton, John Bostic, Cole Holcomb, Thomas Davis Sr. No surprises there. Those were the 6 that we thought were going to make the football team. Remember, Reuben Foster put on IR at some point. He will probably be elevated to the active roster. And in that case, a guy like Khaleke Hudson, depending on what his role is at that point of the season, maybe the odd man out. Maybe they do something at another position and keep all 6 of these and add an additional linebacker. We will see. You get to the cornerbacks on this roster. The question was 5 or 6 corners. I thought they were going to keep 6. They ultimately decided to keep 6. They go with Jimmy Moreland, Ronald Darby, Fabian Moreau, Kendall Fuller, Danny Johnson, and Greg Stroman. Stroman was a guy that I thought could be on the outside looking in. Initially, I had him in my 53-man roster, and then I took him out to add James Smith-Williams in. But they liked the playmaking ability of Greg Stroman. Danny Johnson was the final corner to make the football team. The real discussion there was between Danny Johnson and veteran Aaron Colvin. They decided to go with the youth of Danny Johnson. Rivera said specifically about Danny Johnson, he just continued to get better as camp progressed. As camp wore on, Danny Johnson continued to play good football. We loved the improvement from Danny Johnson, and hence he gets the nod over veteran Aaron Colvin. They essentially are telling you that Colvin has reached his apex in this league. They think that Danny Johnson can continue to get better. So that's what they decided to do at the cornerback position. It's actually a pretty good room if it's healthy. We'll see how that turns out. And then you get to the safety position. Another surprise here in Cameron Curl making the 53-man roster as a 7th-round pick out of Arkansas. I was absolutely flat out wrong about this kid in terms of him having a chance to make this football team. I didn't love the pick. If you remember, you go back and watch my breakdown of the Washington football team's draft. I wasn't a fan of the Cameron Curl pick. There were other guys in the draft that I thought were going to be better pros, and it ultimately may be than Cameron Curl. But they like Cameron Curl. They like his improvement. They like his size. Remember, the one thing that I did like about Cameron Curl was his size as a 6'2" safety. However, I wasn't really impressed with much more than that. But they seem to like Cameron Curl, and we're going to see what he's able to provide for this team, whether it's just a special teams presence or if he gets in the game and is able to provide something on the defensive side of the football. But Landon Collins, Troy Apke, DeShazer Everett, and Cameron Curl are your 4 safeties that make the football team. The only surprise was Sean Davis being cut from the football team. Thought that he was going to make this team, and if anything happened, they would go with 5 safeties and add Cameron Curl to the mix, but not Sean Davis being cut loose and Curl making the roster at the expense of Sean Davis. But that's exactly what happened. So 25 players there, and then of course your no-brainer specials. 3 guys there: Dustin Hopkins, Tress Way, Nick Sundberg. That's not going to change, nor should it. Those are the guys on special teams. So with that being said, that's your roster. It was very intriguing to see the way that this kind of unfolded, and I'm excited about this team. It's a young football team, a very, very young football team. I mean, I talked about this about a couple of weeks ago when I said, look, we've only got about 6 or 7 guys on the roster 30 years of age or older. They've trimmed that down with the releasing of Adrian Peterson, who was one of the elder statesmen on this roster. Now you're looking at Alex Smith, Thomas Davis, Ryan Kerrigan, and Tress Way as your only 30-somethings on this football team. I mean, there aren't many guys that are veterans, and Dontrell Inman as well. Aren't many guys on this football team that are of, age. This is a young football team you're talking about here. So really looking forward to seeing how this team works. All right, let's go to some of these super chats. We got one here from CGM87. Thank you for the super chat, CGM87. Greatly appreciate you. Who writes, Lou, he says, I'm super bitter about Cam Sims. What the F? The lack of talent at wide receiver / tight end is horrific. He said offensive line is setting Dwayne up to fail, and it won't be his fault. So I don't agree with you along the offensive line. I've said this all along. If we're healthy along the offensive line, we'll be fine. It's if the depth is tested that we could have some issues, and it just depends on where. I feel like if the tackle position is able to hold up throughout the course of the year, and maybe we have a guy go down on the interior, whether it's Wes Martin or Chase Rulia, I think we can withstand that, but if you start talking about the tackles going down or one of them going down, that's when you get into some murky waters potentially on the offensive line. We'll see. Maybe the depth is a little bit better than we think, but right now I'm cool with the way the offensive line is set up. As far as Cam Sims not making a football team, we'll see. I've never been the biggest Cam Sims fan. You guys know that. He's been a camp warrior the last few years, but when it comes to actual games, he hasn't been his sharpest. They decided to go in a different direction. They go with Isaiah Wright. We'll see what he's able to provide for them, and we'll find out if they made a mistake or not. Cam Sims, either he'll latch on somewhere else or he'll be back on the practice squad. And if he's on the practice squad, he may ultimately be back on the active roster at some point this season. We'll see. Depends on if he clears waivers or not. I assume he will find a way to clear waivers, and he'll be back on the practice squad. And if he is, I think he'll have a shot to play at some point this season. Rivera's already said you're going to see a lot of different guys, even some that didn't make the football team. Remember, the active roster is going to be 55 players this year, not 53. It's going to be game day activity is 55. You're going to be able to pull up a couple of guys from the practice squad every week instead of having just 46 guys active. So it's going to be a different year. And I think guys like, Cam Sims, who just didn't make it, may have a shot at making this team down the road and getting some real game experience. We'll see if they want him back or not. That's another question. We got a chance to look at the list of guys that they waived, meaning that they more likely than not want those guys back if they clear waivers. So, again, we will see. But nonetheless, I'm not bitter about Cam Sims. Some of you are out there. I know there are a lot of you out there that are Cam Sims fans, wanted to see him get an opportunity. I thought he was going to get an opportunity. I'm not going to sit here and act like I didn't think he was going to get an opportunity this year. I thought he was going to get an opportunity. Doesn't look like that's the case right now, but we'll see. There's a lot of football left to be played, and so he could ultimately see the field at some point this year. And when he does, if that opportunity does present itself, he better be ready to take full advantage. Thank you for the super chat, CGM87. Got another super chat. This one from the Juice Alert. Thank you for the super chat, Juice Alert. Greatly appreciate you. Who writes, Washington will have a 7-9 record in 2020. Stacked D-line and improved cornerbacks equal top 10 defense. Haskins bounced back big time. Wide receivers and running backs underrated. 7-9 would be a really good season for this team, if you ask me. The D-line is definitely stacked. The cornerback position, you could argue it is improved. We're not sure about that quite yet, but we feel like it's a little bit better. And so I don't know if that equals a top 10 defense or not. It all is really, to me, predicated on the defensive line and how dominant they are. If they're as advertised in terms of domination, then yeah, I think you could have a chance to be in that top 10 discussion. I think this is a top 17 defense. If you twisted my arm, maybe top 15, but I'm reluctant to call it a top 10 defense at this point. Haskins, I think, is going to have a really good season. Quiet the naysayers, and we won't be having a discussion next offseason about potentially drafting a quarterback. I think he'll put all of that to rest. And I don't know if the wide receiver and running back groups are underrated or not. Only time will tell. I think the running back group is really good if healthy. I think they're going to prove some people wrong out there. But receiver, there may be some cause for concern at receiver. But we will see. If Terry is what we think he is, Steven Sims is what we think he is, and Dontrell Inman gives us what he's done throughout the course of his career, which is a solid third option on all the teams that he's been on, we'll be just fine at wide receiver. And then you sprinkle in a little bit of Antonio Gandy Golden, the Gandhi man. I think we'll be just fine at wide receiver as well. Thank you for the super chat, the Juice Alert. Got another super chat. This one from Kevin Dorofield. Thank you for the super chat, Kevin Dorofield. Greatly appreciate you, Kev, who writes, building a strong young core team. I'm in. Hunt it. I'm in with you. All in. Pushing all my chips to the center of the table. I love this young nucleus that we've put together. Now I want to see what guys we can get around that young nucleus of players. If Dwayne is what we think he is, he's a part of the young nucleus. If Terry is what we think he is, he's a part of the young nucleus. If Montez is what we think he is, he's a part of the young nucleus. If Chase Young is what we think he is, he's a part of the young nucleus. Jonathan Allen, same thing. If he is, he'll be a part of the young nucleus. Deron Payne. This is a nice young nucleus that we've formed with this team if all of these guys start living up to the expectations. Steven Sims is another guy that we have high hopes for, and you can go down the roster and look at some of these guys. Cole Holcomb, another guy that we're really excited about. Sean Dion Hamilton is a guy that we think has immense talent, and it could potentially be a fixture on this football team moving forward. There are a lot of young guys that are talented that could be a part of this young core. And so I'm definitely excited, and I want to see these guys get opportunities to go out and shine. Thank you for the super chat, Kevin Dorofield. Got another super chat, this one from Quentin Ruiz. Thank you for the super chat, Quentin Ruiz. Greatly appreciate you. Quentin writes, I thought Foster couldn't come back because he was put on IR before the deadline. So, no. If you place a player on IR before the deadline, you can have them come back by after week 3. It's if you put a player on IR prior to that, they can't come back. So, or after that, they can't come back. Once you put a player on IR after the season starts, then they're done. But you have a window right now where you can bring a guy back after you put him on IR. And so you're seeing teams go ahead and put players on IR and try to hold on to some of these guys. So I think you're going to see a situation where these guys, and let me just check to make sure, because it's been really confusing, some of this. I think the deadline is tomorrow at 4:00. Let me fact check all of that. I don't want to put false information out. So let's take a look at this right quick, and take a look at the injury reserve list rules for 2020. Because I think it's really convoluted. It's really interesting to see how some teams will try to utilize this. Let's see. Says the first thing to know that the injury reserve breaks into 2 phases. The first one handles any player placed on the list before roster cut down deadline at 4 p.m. on Saturday, which is today. Those players have their season end, plain and simple. Okay, so Reuben Foster, season is done. So there it is. So you're absolutely right, Quentin. Anybody put on injured reserve before this deadline today. So Rivera talked about the deadline tomorrow. I think they have another deadline tomorrow that you can put players on IR and they can come back, like a Sadiq Charles, for instance. So Reuben Foster, done for the season. He's on IR. He's not where they want him to be. So now the question becomes, what are they going to do with him next year? Are they going to sign him back on a 1-year deal? So there's a whole bunch of different questions to ask there. But Reuben Foster put on IR, which means his season is done. He will not play for this team this year. And frankly, he may not play for this team ever because, again, he's a free agent at the end of the season. So thank you for that clarification, Quentin Ruiz. You put on IR before 4:00 today, which Reuben Foster was. Your season is done. If you're put on IR before 4:00 tomorrow, then you can come back. So there's a discussion about Sadiq Charles potentially going on that list and not counting towards the 53 and maybe opening up a spot for someone else potentially. But we'll see what happens if they decide to go that route with any of the other players. But they put Mike Ledke on that IR list as well. There were several other players that they put on that IR list for 2020 that aren't going to be able to play this season. And Reuben Foster was among that group, so he will not be on this football team this year. Once again, Quentin Ruiz, thank you for clarifying that. Reuben Foster will not be available for this team this season, as he was placed on IR before the 4 p.m. deadline and the 53-man rosters were crystallized. So thank you for that, Quentin Ruiz. I think I have one more super chat before we get out of here. Barrett Downing says, thank you first and foremost for the super chat. As always, BD, greatly appreciate you. My man Barrett writes, Ron's plan is in full effect. HTTR forever. Ron's plan is in full effect. And I've long said that Ron's plan was something that I was all in for. But I'm even more enthralled by Ron's plan now, looking at all of the youngins on the roster. I thought they would try to have more veterans here. They've essentially given us the green light to essentially have fun watching this team this year with all the youngins. There are going to be mistakes. There are going to be some boo-boos made, but that's what you get with the youngins. But it's going to be fun nonetheless. And so I think this is the beginning of the winning Ron's plan. Thank you for the super chat, BD. Got one more. This one from JP Lavecchio. Thank you for the super chat, JP. Greatly appreciate you. Who writes, if you could create the perfect team to beat Washington, where would their strengths be? If you could create a perfect team, honestly speaking, right now, our biggest problem on our football team is on the offensive side of the football. We're just not quite sure what we're going to have available to us right now. So if you're looking to beat this football team, I think you take away Terry McLaurin and you make the other receivers and tight ends beat you. You stop the run. Don't allow that to be a crutch for a young quarterback in Dwayne Haskins. And you take Terry McLaurin away and you dare the other guys to beat you. And if they do offensively, you tip your cap. I mean, there isn't like a roster that you build to beat this team. We're not a juggernaut, so you don't have to build a roster to beat this football team. There are just ways to go about it. I think you have to have a philosophical approach if you're going to beat us. I think on the offensive side of the football, I attack our linebackers because I'm still not sure that we have coverage linebackers on this football team. That's always been something we've struggled with, is covering the opposition's tight end. And so if I'm a team, I'm coming into the game, number one, I'm going to test your run defense because we weren't always strong up front stopping the run. So I'm going to see if you can stop the run with this new group that you have and this new defensive philosophy that you have. If you can stop the run, okay, cool. I'm still going to try to feature my tight end against you because I'm still not sure that you can cover my tight end with your linebackers and safeties. And then I'm going to test your secondary. And whether that's the quick passing game to try to minimize your pass rush, or, to see if Darby is really going to be disciplined and keep everything in front of him, or is he going to allow some big plays behind him? I'm going to test your secondary, though. So, at the beginning of the game, I'm going to try to loosen you up by running the football. And if you give me some gaping holes and I'm able to get 5 a pop, I'm going to do that to make you respect the run game. Maybe bring a Landon Collins into the box as a 7th defender. Now I'm getting one-on-one on the outsides. And so now I'm going to test Ronald Darby. I'm going to test Kendall Fuller. I'm going to test Fabian Moreau and see what those guys can do. That's how I would approach this. Make you bring that extra safety in the box, that extra defender in the box. Now I feel like I've got one-on-one on one of the sides of the field. I'm going to pick a side. I'm going to work that side. If I can't get that extra defender in the box, let's say you stop the run effectively, then I'm going to the quick passing game because I don't want to allow your defensive line to have a chance to tee off on my quarterback. So that's how I would approach this team. But again, we will see how this thing goes. But I don't think there's an actual roster that you put together that has to beat this team. I think this is a team right now that's young, that you just have to come in with a game plan as to how to go about beating this football team. So we'll see what happens. But thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Got another super chat. This one is from Derek JB. Thank you for the super chat, Derek JB, who writes, they are signing Foster next year. You would assume that's the case. If you weren't going to sign him next year, what's the point of putting him on IR? You just cut him because you have no future plans with him. So the assumption is he gets a 1-year prove-it deal next year in the offseason, a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. 2.5 of it is incentive laden, and the $1 million that's still left is guaranteed money. and base salary type of money. So, that's the way that probably works itself out. But we'll see what happens. I assume that they're going to bring him back because, again, why put him on IR and keep him here if you're not going to try to work something out with him at season's end? That doesn't make any sense. So I assume that you're right there, that they'll probably keep him next season. Got another super chat. This one is from Leo Suarez. Thank you for the super chat, Leo Suarez. Greatly appreciate you. Leo writes, every team is ready to go. No excuses. Washington football team about to surprise teams. Young and ready. Rivera has talent surrounding him. I'm excited about this team. No excuses. I don't want to hear about the no preseason or any of that stuff. Everyone had to deal with that. It's a crazy season. It's been a crazy offseason for everyone. Everyone had to deal with the same circumstances. No excuses this year. No equivocations. I'm looking forward to this season. And as you said, I'm looking forward to this. A young football team. We think it's very talented, probably more so than the rest of the league does. I'm hoping that they prove us right and not the rest of the league who thinks we're not all that talented at all. So looking forward to this season. I can honestly say this is probably one of my most exciting lead-ups to a season in a long time, probably since the 2016 season when we won the division in 2015 and we were coming off of that and we were really excited and we thought we had a team that could compete again and do some big things. This is probably the most excitement I've had since going into that 2016 season. So with no preseason football, I am juiced, amped, and ready to go. I am chomping at the bit to see this team get on the field and have it count for real. So I'm really looking forward to this season. And it's a young team. And as I've explained to you guys already, I'm a fan of teams that have had young ball clubs recently. The Braves, 3 years ago, where the baby Braves weren't expected to win for another 2 years, and they won the division out of nowhere and have been a really good team, and they're still relatively young. The Grizzlies this year were picked to be 28 out of 30 teams in the NBA in terms of where they would finish. And they finished one game out of the postseason, essentially playing in that play-in playoff game this year. And they were a young team, one of the youngest in the NBA. Fun to watch. That's how I feel about this Washington football team this year. Very young, could exceed expectations. I'd love to crash the party, show up a year or two earlier than everybody else expects us to. But I'm not counting on that. I'm just looking to have fun with a lot of young players, watching them grow. Thank you for the super chat, Leo Suarez. I think that is it. No, I got one more super chat. This one from Derek JB. Thank you for the super chat, Derek JB. Double up. Thank you for doubling up. Greatly appreciate you, Derek JB, who writes, proud of you, bro. No, thank you. I'm proud of you for continuing to support the Louie T Network and all that I do here. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you so much for everything. And with that being said, I'm going to glide to the side. I think I got another super chat here. Got another one from Derek JB. Greatly appreciate you again. Thank you for tripling up, JB. Derek JB writes, is there a wide receiver you would pick up in free agency? I'd have to see what other teams cut loose in terms of the free agency heap, in terms of that scrap heap of receivers. But I'm cool with what we have right now. If they're cool with it, I'm cool with it. Again, you got Kelvin Harmon coming back next year, so I wouldn't really go out of the way to do too much. You got 5 guys that you like here. Cam Sims may be back on the practice squad. That adds a 6th guy. And then you got Kelvin Harmon, who's on the mend. That'll be back next year. So I'm cool with what we have at receiver. It's a young group, and I want to see them grow and flourish. So I'm good with what we have. I don't think we need to go out and do anything else. So I'm cool with what we have at wide receiver. And so with that being said, thank you guys for joining me. Remember, I am a Washington football fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Washington spirit will never die. Washington spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, hail to our beloved Washington football team. Remember, if you haven't already done so, what are you waiting on? Hit that subscribe button. And also, make sure you turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. And we're going to rev this thing up into high gear next week as we will kick off the Washington Football Nightly program every single night. Washington football talk for you guys during the course of the week. So in that case, be on the lookout for that. We'll start that program on Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. sharp. Be looking for that, and I look forward to dropping that on you guys moving forward. If anything else big happens with this football team over the next 48 to 72 hours, you'll see this face all up in your space once again. But if not, we will reconvene on Tuesday evening for Washington Football Nightly. But until then, you guys stay safe, take care of yourselves, enjoy the weekend, and we'll reconvene at a later date and time. You guys take care. Have a good one.
LouieTeeNetwork.